Inside ADX Florence, Colorado, America's billion-dollar, most secure prison. ADX Florence is officially described as the most secure prison in the United States. Built to contain the country's most dangerous federal inmates, it is also one of the most expensive correctional facilities ever constructed and maintained. Drawing on publicly available government records, court filings, federal budgets, inspector general reports, and investigative journalism, this documentary examines how a prison designed to disappear people from society became a billion-dollar system, where extreme security, isolation, and control carry extraordinary financial and human costs. The fortress that swallowed a fortune. No one escapes from ADX Florence. That is not a slogan. It is a statistic. Since the prison opened in the mid-1990s, there have been no confirmed successful escapes. Not one. According to federal records and Bureau of Prisons statements, every man sent here is meant to stay contained, physically, psychologically, financially. But what almost no one talks about is the price tag. The cost of keeping people inside this mountain fortress is so high that, according to government budget data and congressional oversight reports, it quietly dwarfs most other federal prisons in America. ADX Florence sits in Fremont County, Colorado, far from major cities, pressed against empty land and open sky. From the outside, it doesn't look dramatic. Low concrete buildings. Fences. Guard towers. No imposing walls like in the movies. But appearances are part of the design. According to Bureau of Prisons planning documents, the real security is hidden, in reinforced concrete, underground utilities, electronic surveillance systems, and layers of redundancy built to prevent even the smallest failure. The prison was built after a series of violent incidents at earlier federal facilities. In the late 1980s, 2 correctional officers were murdered at a federal penitentiary in Illinois. Court records and Department of Justice reports describe how those killings exposed a terrifying truth: some inmates were still able to coordinate violence even while incarcerated. The federal government's response was not subtle. It was absolute. ADX Florence was conceived as a solution with no margin for error. Construction began in the early 1990s. According to federal procurement records and contemporary news reporting, the cost of building the facility exceeded $60 million at the time. Adjusted for inflation, that number climbs dramatically. But construction was only the beginning. Unlike standard prisons, ADX was designed for permanent high-cost operation. Every system, airflow, lighting, doors, communication, was engineered for control rather than efficiency. Each cell is a poured concrete box. The bed is concrete. The desk is concrete. Even the shower is concrete. According to court filings from inmates who later challenged their conditions of confinement, the design reduces movable parts to nearly zero. Less opportunity for damage. Less opportunity for weapons. Less opportunity for human error. More cost. Unlike traditional cell blocks, ADX cells are built as self-contained units. Food slots, handcuff ports, and remote-controlled doors all operate independently. That means more wiring. More sensors. More maintenance. According to Bureau of Prisons budget breakdowns, ADX Florence requires significantly higher per-inmate spending than any other federal prison in the system. Publicly available figures show that housing a prisoner at ADX can cost more than twice the annual amount of housing someone at a high-security penitentiary, and several times the cost of a medium-security facility. The difference comes down to staffing, infrastructure, and technology. Staffing alone is a financial black hole. According to federal employment data and union disclosures, ADX Florence requires a higher staff-to-inmate ratio than most prisons. Officers are trained not just in corrections, but in specialized procedures for escorting inmates who may never see another human face directly. Movements are choreographed. One inmate at a time. Multiple officers per escort. Every movement logged, monitored, and recorded. That level of staffing does not come cheap. Federal pay scales show that correctional officers assigned to ADX often earn more than their counterparts at other facilities, due to hazard considerations, seniority, and specialized training. Add overtime, frequent, according to Inspector General audits, and personnel costs balloon. Over decades, those costs compound into hundreds of millions of dollars. Then there is the technology. ADX Florence operates with an extensive surveillance network. Cameras monitor virtually every corridor and exterior space. Doors are electronically controlled. Motion sensors track movement. According to court records and expert testimony cited in civil lawsuits, the prison security systems are designed with redundancy, backup power, backup controls, backup monitoring, so that a single failure cannot compromise containment. Redundancy is expensive by design. If a door control system fails, there is a backup. If the backup fails, there is a manual override. If the override fails, protocols lock everything down. Each layer adds cost. Each layer requires maintenance contracts, specialized technicians, and constant testing. Federal contracting records show recurring expenditures for electronic systems, security upgrades, and infrastructure modernization at ADX Florence long after construction ended. But perhaps the most controversial cost lies not in concrete or cameras, but in time. Inmates at ADX Florence are typically held in near-total isolation. According to Bureau of Prisons policies and multiple court filings, prisoners may spend up to 23 hours a day alone in their cells. Meals are delivered through slots. Recreation, when permitted, occurs in isolated enclosures. Human contact is minimal by design. Isolation reduces risk. It also increases expense. Mental health care at ADX Florence represents one of the facility's most complex and costly challenges. Court documents from federal lawsuits describe how prolonged isolation can exacerbate or trigger serious psychological symptoms. In response to litigation and settlements, the Bureau of Prisons expanded mental health services at ADX, including specialized staff, monitoring programs, and treatment units. Those services cost money: federal salaries, clinical contracts, training programs, and compliance oversight. According to Department of Justice settlement agreements, the government committed to ongoing funding to ensure mental health evaluations and treatment for inmates housed in extreme conditions. Healthcare costs extend beyond mental health. As the inmate population ages, many serving life sentences without parole, medical expenses rise. Chronic conditions require treatment. Emergency care requires transport under heavy guard. According to publicly available Bureau of Prisons healthcare budgets, medical care for high-security inmates is significantly more expensive than for the general prison population. Every hospital visit involves multiple officers, secure transport vehicles, coordination with outside medical facilities, and security protocols that turn routine care into a logistical operation. All of it is paid for by taxpayers. But ADX Florence is not just a prison. It is a message. According to statements from former Bureau of Prisons officials cited in investigative reporting, the facility exists as a final answer. A place for inmates deemed too dangerous, too influential, or too uncontrollable for any other institution. That mission justifies the cost, at least on paper. Yet critics argue the spending raises serious questions. Why does a single facility require such an outsized share of resources? Why do per-inmate costs continue to rise even as the federal prison population declines? According to congressional testimony and watchdog reports, ADX Florence is frequently cited as an example of how extreme security incarceration creates long-term financial commitments that are nearly impossible to reverse. Once built, the system must be maintained. Concrete cracks. Electronics age. Staff retire. New threats emerge. Every year brings new spending. According to federal budget documents, funding for high-security facilities like ADX Florence remains stable or increases even during broader cuts to correctional programs. And then there is the secrecy. Much of ADX Florence's operation is shielded from public view. Security concerns limit transparency. Detailed breakdowns of costs are often buried in aggregate budgets. Investigative journalists have pieced together estimates using public records requests, inspector general reports, and court filings, but even they acknowledge gaps. Those gaps raise uncomfortable questions. Is the cost justified by safety alone? Or has ADX Florence become a financial monument to fear, a system so expensive and so specialized that it continues simply because it exists? Former inmates who later spoke publicly, according to news interviews and sworn declarations, described the prison not just as secure, but as suffocating. Former staff describe relentless procedures, constant vigilance, and burnout. None of this is cheap. None of it is accidental. ADX Florence was designed to remove uncertainty at any cost. And that cost, measured over decades, has quietly approached the billion-dollar mark when construction, staffing, healthcare, maintenance, and security upgrades are combined. This is not just a story about prisoners. It is a story about money. About how fear becomes infrastructure. About how control becomes a budget line that never shrinks. And as we move deeper inside ADX Florence, the question becomes unavoidable. When a prison is built to last forever, who is really trapped inside it, the inmates, or the system that pays to keep them there? The economics of total control. By the time an inmate arrives at ADX Florence, the financial decisions about his confinement have already been made. According to Bureau of Prisons classification policies and federal court records, placement at ADX is not determined by a single crime, but by a long trail of behavior, perceived risk, and institutional history. Once that decision is approved, the costs begin to stack, quietly, relentlessly, and with almost no public debate. Every transfer to ADX Florence is itself an operation. Federal transportation records and court filings describe how inmates are moved under extreme security protocols. Air transport, armored vehicles, multiple escort teams, advanced coordination with local law enforcement. These transfers are rare, but they are expensive. Unlike routine prison movement, an ADX transfer is treated as a high-risk federal operation, with costs absorbed into broader Department of Justice budgets. From the moment an inmate enters the facility, spending becomes systematic. The cell alone tells part of the story. Each one is engineered for isolation and permanence. According to construction specifications cited in investigative reporting, the concrete used at ADX is reinforced to a level uncommon even in maximum security prisons. Plumbing and electrical systems are embedded deep within walls to prevent tampering. Lighting is controlled externally. Temperature is regulated centrally. This design reduces violence and escape attempts. It also guarantees high maintenance costs. When something breaks at ADX Florence, it is not a simple repair. According to Internal Bureau of Prisons maintenance guidelines referenced in oversight reports, repairs often require specialized contractors, security clearances, and lockdown procedures. A single malfunctioning door or sensor can trigger restricted movement across an entire unit, increasing staffing needs and overtime hours. Over time, these small expenses add up. Staffing remains the single largest recurring cost. According to federal payroll data and union testimony, correctional officers at ADX Florence operate under conditions unlike almost anywhere else in the federal system. Movement protocols require multiple officers for tasks that would normally involve one. An inmate leaving his cell for medical care, legal consultation, or recreation may require a full escort team, supervisors, and monitoring staff. That means more labor hours per inmate. More overtime. More burnout. Former staff members, speaking to journalists under anonymity in multiple news reports, have described ADX as a place where procedures never relax. Every shift is intense. Every mistake is treated as potentially catastrophic. That culture, while effective for control, drives higher turnover and training costs. Training itself is another financial layer. Officers assigned to ADX receive specialized instruction in restraint techniques, crisis response, and high-security operations. According to Bureau of Prisons training budgets, this instruction is ongoing. Refresher courses. Scenario drills. Compliance training tied to federal court settlements. Each program costs money. Each officer trained represents an investment the institution must protect. Then there is healthcare. Court filings and Department of Justice reports confirm what critics have long argued: prolonged isolation increases the likelihood of serious mental health issues. In response to lawsuits brought by inmates and advocacy groups, the federal government agreed to expand mental health services at ADX Florence. These agreements were not symbolic. According to settlement documents and Inspector General reviews, ADX Florence employs psychologists, psychiatrists, clinical social workers, and support staff dedicated to monitoring inmates held in extreme isolation. Evaluations are conducted regularly. Treatment plans are documented. Compliance is audited. All of it is expensive. Mental health services in a high-security environment require additional safeguards. Sessions are monitored. Movement to treatment areas requires escorts. Crisis interventions can trigger full unit lockdowns. Each layer of security adds cost. Physical healthcare is no less complex. ADX Florence houses inmates serving life sentences and long federal terms. As years pass, chronic illnesses become common. Diabetes. Heart disease. Mobility issues. According to Bureau of Prisons healthcare spending reports, older inmates require more frequent and more costly medical interventions. When treatment cannot be provided on-site, inmates are transported to outside medical facilities. These trips are among the most expensive single events in the federal prison system. Multiple officers. Secure vehicles. Coordination with hospitals. Temporary lockdowns. According to watchdog analyses, a single hospital visit can cost thousands of dollars beyond the medical bill itself. Multiply that by decades. Security technology is another silent drain. ADX Florence relies on an array of electronic systems, surveillance cameras, motion detectors, door controls, alarm networks. According to federal contracting databases, these systems require constant upgrades. Software becomes obsolete. Hardware wears out. New threats require new solutions. Unlike consumer technology, prison security systems cannot fail. Redundancy is mandatory. Backup power systems. Secondary control rooms. Emergency protocols tested repeatedly. Every upgrade requires procurement processes, vendor contracts, and security reviews. Every contract adds to the long-term cost of operating the facility. And then there are the legal costs. ADX Florence has been the subject of numerous lawsuits challenging conditions of confinement. While many claims are dismissed or resolved without admission of wrongdoing, they still require government lawyers, court proceedings, expert testimony, and compliance measures. According to public court records, some cases resulted in settlements that mandated operational changes, changes that required additional staffing, new programs, or infrastructure modifications. Each legal outcome carried a financial consequence, whether directly through payments or indirectly through compliance spending. But perhaps the most overlooked cost is opportunity. Money spent maintaining ADX Florence is money not spent elsewhere. According to congressional budget hearings, critics argue that funds allocated to extreme security incarceration could be redirected toward rehabilitation, re-entry programs, or lower-cost alternatives for inmates who no longer pose the same level of risk. Supporters of ADX counter that the facility serves a narrow but essential purpose. It houses individuals deemed too dangerous for any other environment. According to former Bureau of Prisons officials quoted in investigative reports, the cost is justified by the prevention of violence, escapes, and coordination of crimes from behind bars. This is the central contradiction of ADX Florence. It works. And it costs too much to fail. Once an inmate is placed there, the system has little incentive, and few mechanisms, to step back. Transfers out of ADX are rare and slow. According to Bureau of Prisons data, progression through security levels can take years or decades, if it happens at all. That means long-term commitments. Each inmate represents not just a security concern, but a financial liability measured in millions over a lifetime of confinement. According to estimates derived from federal per-inmate cost data, housing a single inmate at ADX Florence for decades can approach or exceed several $1 million. Multiply that by the population. The prison does not generate revenue. It does not rehabilitate in the traditional sense. It exists to contain risk at maximum cost. And yet, it continues to expand its financial footprint. Maintenance contracts renew. Staffing levels remain high. Healthcare costs rise with age. Technology upgrades continue. According to federal budget projections, spending on high-security incarceration remains stable even as other areas face cuts. ADX Florence has become permanent. Not just as a building, but as a line item. Critics argue that permanence is the real danger. Once society accepts that some people must be isolated forever, the cost becomes secondary. Budgets follow fear. Fear becomes policy. Policy becomes infrastructure. And infrastructure, once built, demands to be used. As we move closer to the human stories inside ADX Florence, the inmates, the staff, the people living within this billion-dollar system, the question becomes sharper. Is ADX Florence a necessary safeguard against the worst crimes imaginable? Or is it a financial machine that no longer knows how to stop? Because in a system designed for total control, even the money has nowhere to go, except deeper inside. The human ledger. By the time the numbers are totaled, ADX Florence stops feeling like a prison and starts resembling a balance sheet. Every concrete wall, every reinforced door, every hour of human isolation carries a cost. But unlike construction invoices or staffing budgets, the most difficult costs to calculate are human, and those are the ones that rarely appear in federal spreadsheets. According to Bureau of Prisons policy statements and court filings, ADX Florence was never designed for rehabilitation. It was designed for incapacitation. The men sent here are labeled the most dangerous in the federal system. Terrorists, organized crime leaders, serial killers, inmates accused of orchestrating violence from behind bars. That label follows them into a system built to remove unpredictability entirely. But unpredictability is not the same as humanity. Former inmates who later spoke publicly, according to sworn declarations and media interviews, describe ADX Florence as a place where time dissolves. Days blur. Seasons disappear. Human interaction is reduced to voices through doors or brief commands during escorted movement. These accounts are not speculation, they appear repeatedly in court filings reviewed by federal judges. One former inmate described the silence as weaponized. Another described losing the ability to speak fluidly after years of minimal conversation. These statements were presented under oath in legal challenges to conditions of confinement. In some cases, judges acknowledged the severity of the conditions while still ruling that they fell within constitutional limits. That acknowledgement carries weight. When courts accept extreme isolation as lawful, it effectively authorizes the continued spending required to sustain it. According to legal scholars cited in investigative reporting, every court decision upholding ADX conditions reinforces the system's permanence. The money continues to flow because the structure has been validated. Staff experience a different version of the same pressure. Correctional officers at ADX Florence operate in an environment where trust is limited and vigilance is constant. According to interviews published in national news outlets and testimony from correctional unions, working at ADX is mentally exhausting. Officers rarely see the people they guard as individuals. They see files, protocols, threat assessments. Burnout is common. Federal employment records show turnover rates that exceed those of lower security institutions. Replacing staff requires recruitment, background checks, training, and months of onboarding. Each departure represents a financial loss, experience walking out the door, replaced at significant cost. Mental health support for staff adds another layer of expense. According to Bureau of Prisons internal programs referenced in oversight hearings, officers in high-security environments have access to counseling and support services. These programs exist for a reason. The psychological toll of working in a place like ADX Florence is well documented. The system spends millions to contain violence it hopes never occurs. Outside the prison, the surrounding community feels the economic gravity of the facility. ADX Florence is one of the largest employers in Fremont County. According to local economic reports and census data, hundreds of families rely on the prison for stable federal jobs. Salaries circulate through the local economy, housing, schools, businesses. This creates another kind of dependency. Closing or downsizing ADX Florence would not just be a correctional decision. It would be an economic shock. Local officials have acknowledged this reality in public statements reported by regional news outlets. The prison is embedded not just in federal budgets, but in regional livelihoods. That dependence complicates reform. Calls to reduce isolation or reclassify inmates often collide with concerns about safety, staffing needs, and economic stability. Every proposed change carries financial implications. Fewer inmates could mean fewer staff. More programs could mean more spending. Less isolation could mean higher perceived risk. The system resists change because change is expensive. ADX Florence also occupies a symbolic role in American justice. It is cited in political speeches, policy debates, and media narratives as proof that the government can control even the most dangerous individuals. That symbolism has value. According to political analysts, symbols shape budgets. They justify expenditures that might otherwise be questioned. $1 billion prison sends a message. But symbols do not age well. As the years pass, the population at ADX Florence grows older. According to Bureau of Prisons demographic data, many inmates are now middle-aged or elderly. Some have spent decades in isolation. Their risk profiles change. Their healthcare needs increase. Their capacity for violence may decline. The cost does not. Healthcare spending rises as bodies wear down. Accessibility modifications become necessary. Specialized care becomes routine. According to Inspector General reports, aging prison populations represent one of the fastest-growing expenses in the correctional system. ADX Florence concentrates that problem. Critics argue that continued isolation of elderly inmates serves little security purpose while dramatically increasing cost. Supporters argue that risk cannot be reduced to age alone. Court filings reflect this tension. Arguments over whether continued placement at ADX is necessary or excessive. Judges rarely intervene. The default outcome is inertia. And inertia is expensive. When federal agencies plan budgets, they plan for continuity. According to appropriations documents, ADX Florence is funded not as a temporary measure, but as a permanent fixture. Money is allocated years in advance. Long-term contracts are signed. Infrastructure investments assume decades of operation. The prison is not winding down. It is settling in. This raises the final question, one that lingers beyond security assessments and budget tables. What happens when a system built for the worst-case scenario becomes routine? ADX Florence was designed for exceptions. But exceptions, when institutionalized, become norms. According to criminologists cited in academic research, normalization of extreme measures tends to expand their use, not limit it. Once the machinery exists, it seeks purpose. The billion-dollar cost of ADX Florence is not the result of a single decision. It is the accumulation of thousands of choices, each justified, each incremental, each defended as necessary at the time. Together, they form a system that is nearly impossible to dismantle. Taxpayers fund it. Courts uphold it. Communities depend on it. Politicians cite it. And the men inside it disappear from public conversation almost entirely. There are no riots broadcast on the evening news. No dramatic escapes. No visible chaos. ADX Florence works quietly. That quiet is its greatest strength, and its greatest danger. Because when a system operates without noise, without scandal, without interruption, it escapes scrutiny. Budgets pass. Contracts renew. Lives continue in isolation. The cost becomes abstract. Until someone asks the simplest question of all. Not whether ADX Florence is secure, but whether it is worth what it costs. In the end, ADX Florence is not just a prison. It is a mirror. A reflection of how far a society is willing to go, and how much it is willing to spend, to feel safe. And once that price is accepted, it rarely goes down.